Welcome to 365 Christian Men, where every day we aim to inspire and encourage with real-life stories about men. October 29th, Keith C. Smith. Single moms and fatherless sons live with a gaping hole. Stand by them. This is a burden that drove Keith's passion and shaped his life.
Single moms and fatherless sons live with a gaping hole, so stand by them. 23-year-old Keith Smith tapped on the driver's side window of his sister Sandy's car. He was shivering since the temperatures at night dropped quickly in Cortez, Colorado. His sister rolled down her window, tears streaked her face, and it was too dark to see who was in the car with her. Keith told Sandy their mom had sent him to say Sandy needed to get home. After Sandy got home, she slipped into the house and went straight to her bedroom. Feeling concerned for her, Keith knocked on her door. Sandy let him in and explained that she had just told her boyfriend that she was pregnant. Filled with compassion in that moment, Keith pulled Sandy in for a hug, held her while she cried, and he promised to help her tell their parents. When Sandy told her parents, her mother was angry, but her father looked at her and said, "Sandy, I know what it was like to not be loved and to not be wanted. I am not going to do that to you. You are my daughter, and I'm going to stand by my daughter and this baby." In that moment, Keith cried, and he told Sandy that he would stand with her too. Sandy's baby was born in July. That fall, Keith started law school at Arizona State University. The next spring, Sandy and her little man needed housing. Keith and his new wife invited them to share their apartment. Having a child there was a big adjustment. Sometimes it was hard to study for Keith and he got frustrated. But the little man brought so much joy. He laughed and ran around the coffee table dancing to his favorite song, and he cuddled with them when they watched movies. Keith loved Sandy's little man. Sandy took classes in the evenings, so Keith stepped in to help with the baby. He would often take the 2-year-old for a walk. During one of their walks, his nephew looked up and asked, "Are you my daddy?" Keith didn't know how to respond at first. Trying to find the right words, he looked down and said, "No, little man, I'm your uncle. Your mother is my sister. Do you understand that?" His nephew quietly looked down and nodded. Keith didn't want to upset Sandy, so he chose not to tell her. But he worried about her son, and he worried if the subject would come up again. Months had passed. Keith's nephew was almost 3 when he again asked, "Are you my daddy?" Keith explained once more that he was his uncle, not his dad, but he loved him very much. About a month later, Keith was on bedtime duty, and as he tucked his nephew into bed, he looked at Keith with sad eyes and asked, "Uncle Keith, where's my daddy?" Keith didn't want to tell the boy that his father had never contacted them. He said, "I don't know, little man. Maybe he hasn't shown up yet, but God will send him along soon." The boy flashed a big smile and fell asleep. Keith wondered if he had just lied to his nephew or if his words had been inspired somehow. 2 years passed. Sandy fell in love with a good man named Ryan, and soon there was a wedding. Keith was a groomsman in the wedding, and he stood with his sister during the ceremony. When Ryan said his vows, he spoke to Sandy, then he turned to Sandy's son. Ryan vowed to love him as his own and be a father to him. In that moment, Keith wanted to bust out crying, but keeping his composure, he only allowed one manly tear to slip down his cheek. At the reception that night, little man, now 5, played and laughed with his cousins. Then he suddenly ran to Keith, jumped on his lap, and wrapped his arms around Keith's neck. He pulled Keith's ear toward his mouth and whispered, "I'm so happy." Keith leaned back and looked into those big brown eyes and said, "Me too, buddy." Then his nephew said, "Know why? Because my daddy is here now. God showed him the way, and he came for me." Keith looked at little man and said, "Yes, he sure has." In the Word of God, in Deuteronomy 10:18, it says, God does what is right and fair for the child without parents. Do you know a single mom or a fatherless child who needs you to encourage them? Single moms and fatherless sons live with a gaping hole, so stand by them.
Thank you for listening to today's story. Every day of the year, our hope is to inspire you with real-life stories of faithful men who have gone before us. Today's story was about a man who isn't as well known as some, but his story proves that God uses ordinary men in many different ways to accomplish His purposes. Is there a man whose story has inspired you, but most people have never heard his story? We would like to hear his story and maybe include him in 365 Christian Men. Please visit our website to share the story of a man who has inspired you, and join us tomorrow at 365christianmen.com.